Hi there. Today I want to make some napkin rings. To hold the rings, I've got a chuck with pin jaws. I can spread those open in expansion mode inside the hole of the napkin ring and hold it to do the shaping and the finishing. But I realize not everyone out there has chucks and pin jaws, especially if you're a new turner. So I also want to show you a way to make an expansion chuck, and we'll get looking at that right now. Let's go make some napkin rings. The wood I'm using for these napkin rings is walnut, and I've laid out for 1 1/4 inch holes for the napkin rings. I've laid out for 6 rings. The board is 1 5/8 inch thick, which is way thicker than I want the napkin rings to be. So I'm going to rip it down the center after I drill these holes, and that way I'll end up with a total of 12 napkin rings. I've set a fence on my drill press table to make sure that as I move this along, it'll be centered on each one. Now I just have to eyeball it across here and drill. I've also put a piece of sacrificial plywood underneath to make sure I don't wreck my drill press table. And I don't have a lot of chip out when it goes through. Now I'll just carry on, do the other 5, and I'll be back. Now I need to cross-cut this board, and then I will rip the 2 pieces apart. And now I'll just rip those 2 strips into the 4 strips I need. Even though I'm using a saw stop, I'm very cautious about that blade, not just because of my fingers. I'm pretty well protected, but also because if I hit my finger on there, it will stop and protect me, but it'll damage the blade, and also the brake itself will have to be replaced. So I've put this spacer here, so I can slide this and have it exactly on the center of that line to cut. Then I'll use this hold down clamp to lock it in place and put it through. After this one is cut, I'll just flip this around end for end, do the same on this end, and repeat the process for the others. Well, I've got my 12 rectangles now. They're not perfect squares. The hole's not perfectly in the center. That doesn't matter. If I was to put this on the lathe now and start turning them, there's a good chance I'd get chip out because of the corners. So I'm going to take these to my disc sander first and just sand them a little bit round to alleviate part of that problem. So that's the next step. So I have my 12 blanks ready for the napkin rings, and I have a piece of scrap wood here, 1 7/8 square, 6 inches long, and that's what I intend to use to make an expansion chuck to hold these on the lathe. Let's go over the lathe and I'll show you how I want to do that. I found the center on both ends and I've mounted it between a drive and a live center. I've also drawn a center line down all 4 sides. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a tenon on one end to fit in a chuck, and on the other end I'm going to round it over down to just slightly under that 1 1/4 inch that is the size of the hole for the ring. I'm not going to round the entire piece. I'll explain why shortly. So I'm going to start by using a peeling cut on this end to make the tenon, and then I'll round over this end. Now I'm going to mount this in a chuck to carry on. Now with it mounted in the chuck, I have my calipers set to 1 1/4 inches, and I want to turn this down to just slightly less than that 1 1/4 inches. The napkin ring itself is 3/4 inch thick. I want to make a mark 5/8 of an inch from the end. There. And I'm going to turn this from here down to a little under 1 1/4 inches. When I started turning it with the skew chisel, it slipped on me, went past that 5/8 of an inch mark, but I've got a shoulder there now. That should work just fine. What I want it to do is just stop the ring from going all the way on, and this works fine. It's a little bit loose, which is what I want. I want them all to slide on there nicely. Now what I'm going to do is take this to the band saw, and I'm going to cut straight down this line, maybe a little over halfway. Then what I intend to do is put a cone live center on here, drive it into there when the ring is on, and that should spread it open and hold that there tightly as an expansion chuck. I'll be right back after I get this cut on the bandsaw. I've got it cut now. I'm going to put the ring on, and I have to make sure that the grain runs perpendicular to this cut. If I put it parallel so that the grain is up and down, when this spreads, this is going to be narrow enough that it would probably snap it. Now if I put it on here, bring this in, and tighten it up, there, it's locked it in now. I should be able to turn it. I have this end of the ring sticking out about 1/8 of an inch beyond the end of this expansion chuck. What I wanted to do was bring my tool in and round over the inside corner just a little bit. But this is in the way. I hadn't thought of that. So what I'm doing now is I'll pull this back. I've got a 1/2 inch dowel. I put a point on the end, not too sharp. It'll sit in there, and then this end I will use the one-way live center to push on it and drive it in there until it locks it in place. That gives me much more room to get in here with the tool. Now there is, of course, a limit to just how much pressure I can put on this dowel. It'll bend if I put too much on, and that'll cause me nothing but trouble. So this is not as tight as if it was glued on there, but it's plenty snug enough that I should be able to do this if my tools are sharp enough. If I had a steel rod instead of this, I could put a lot more pressure on it, but I don't think it's really necessary. So I'll try turning this now and see what happens. It's tight enough to work effectively as long as I'm pushing in against the expansion chuck. But once I start coming out this way, it wants to push it off of there. So I'll have to do most of my turning with the push to my left toward the headstock. To make sure that I can turn it toward the headstock, I'm going to remove some more of this. Now that gives me plenty of room to work on this side. I think that's sufficient for the size. I'm going to set a pair of calipers to that size so that each one I will try to get exactly the same or very close to it. I see that I have a small flat spot. I'm just going to round this off a little bit better. Now I'm going to sand this. I won't leave the camera on for the sanding. Then I'm going to reverse it and do the other side the same way. As I was sanding this, I came to the conclusion that it's just a little bit too plain. So I'm going to put just a couple of grooves in the face. Now I'm wondering if I should burn those to give them some real good contrast. I think I will leave them as they are for now. I can always burn them in the future. Now I'll go back and sand this. I have it all sanded now. I sanded the first side, put on the finish, reversed it, sanded the second side. Now I'm going to put on the finish on this end. My finish is my usual 1/3 shellac, 1/3 boiled linseed oil, and 1/3 lacquer thinner. Just going to add a little bit into this groove. Let it run around in there. And I'll put some on this piece of cloth, shop towel, and add it. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes to dry, and I'll be back and I'll buff this. Got the speed set at 2000 RPM to buff this. Just going to use a few layers of this shop towel. And that's one napkin ring complete. I'll just sand gently on the inside, but that's about it. And I'm quite pleased with it. Well, there you go, one napkin ring. I'm kind of pleased with it. I'll have to check with She Who Must Be Obeyed to see if she even wants the others. Our usual fancy napkins are called paper towels, so I'm not so sure she's going to be all that interested. My main reason for doing this anyway was the expansion chunk idea. And I'd like to say, boy, am I ever smart, I just thought of that, but I didn't. I was doing some spindle turning one time, and using the cone live center instead of the one-way, I split it. And later, after I got over that, it got me thinking, and I realized I could use it for something. This is what I came up with. So I hope that'll help somebody. One little tip, after I sanded the inside, it was large enough that this wouldn't expand enough using a wood dowel to compress it. And so I just put some masking tape, about 8 layers, sliced them where these slices are from the bandsaw, and it works just fine. So I hope this will give you some ideas what you can do if you don't have the chuck and the pin jaws. I know I didn't have them when I first started turning. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this. Be safe in your shop. Have a great day. Take care now. Bye-bye.